COVID-19. We are thrilled that you've joined us from coast to coast to coast on this rainy, sunny, hot, cold, and everything in between weather. My name is Kitty Pope, and in the next 60 minutes, we hope to share with you marketing and communication tools to help you reinvent your library and tell the new post-COVID story. And it's a great story, full of courage and innovative ideas and promises, and yeah, maybe even a little bit of fun. To get started, we recognize that each community is different, and what resonates here in balmy southwestern Ontario today may be totally different than what speaks to residents in beautiful Iqaluit or Nanaimo. There's no perfect solution in these perfect times, but we will share with you some ideas to help you reimagine and market your public library. Joining me today is a team that created this tool that you're looking at. Mary, Calgary, the mighty Calgary Public Library, Chris Woodrow from Windsor Public, Carol Nelson from Vancouver Public, and Daphne Woods from the Greater Victoria Public Library. We will talk about the CULC toolkit specifically for the next 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to chat line and answer your questions. And I know you already have lots of questions, from how do I promote curbside service to will our customers actually return, which seems to be a huge question. So let's get started turning lemons into lemonade, and it'll start off with Daphne, and marketing and communications includes.
Thank you very much, Kitty. As you can see here, we've listed just at a glance some of the expertise that a marketing and communications department would provide a public library. We've also highlighted something that is, of course, very relevant to our times, and that's crisis communications. When we were designing this toolkit, we emphasized the phases of crisis communications. If you think back to where we were just as our physical branches started to close, all of the impacts for all of our staff, our communities, our leadership, all of our supporters, all of our funders. We've been through quite a journey, but of course, we're nowhere near the end. We are going to be discussing a phased approach to communications. And as Kitty said, and as I understand, all of the CULC working groups understand, each individual library system will have its own response given local conditions and requirements, the constant ebb and flow of new information and building on strengths that the library system had before we entered this pandemic. So we'll leave this slide here for you to either raise some questions if there's anything here you'd like to look at further when we get to the Q&A section. But let's move on now to our next slide, which is an emphasis about marketing. So words are important. Words are always important. They're certainly important for leadership. They're very important for the work that we do in marketing and communications. So we wanted to make something clear from the outset, and we've spent more time elaborating in the toolkit, the difference between marketing and social marketing. Social marketing is what communications and marketing professionals who work in the library sector are focused on. It's not social media. What it is a component of marketing that actually is dedicated to the benefit of communities and for the greater good. And that's really important. That's exactly aligned with the values, with the mandate, with all of the work that everyone who is part of the library community is doing and advancing. So we're a member of the team that can help tell the library story, that can help prepare communities for the changes that are to come, that can help explain why we aren't able to deliver things in the same way, but that does not mean we can't deliver the same result. It just may be happening in a different way than perhaps you're used to or what you expect. So before we leave this slide, the clients, if we look at social marketing in terms of who are we serving, we're serving the same folks that you are. The communities that are served by public libraries, those are our clients. And what's our brand? What is the brand of public libraries? We can proudly say our brand is public trust. We've earned it. We have been around for many years. We have encountered many challenges. Libraries were there during the pandemic at the start of the last century. Libraries were there. Libraries have been through every monumental seismic change, both locally, nationally, globally. We will continue to be so, and will approach all communications with public trust at the center. So let's talk about this a little bit more. If we go to the next slide now. So perception is reality. You've probably heard that statement more than once. And what's essential if you are working on the premise that trust is our brand, trust is the most precious thing that we have. If we have earned that trust, then to hold that trust, we need to carefully set the right tone for communications during a pandemic. So there's two opposing forces here that are at work that I'm sure every person on this webinar has experienced. You may even have experienced it yourself as an individual. There's a high tension between a fear of returning to public spaces, and then at the same time, an eagerness to return to favorite places. And these two are in conflict. So either perspective that you take, and even if you shift back and forth, as we all do, the library experience will be different. That is a constant. That is a known. And what we need to do is to meet the audience where they are by helping them through this fear, by providing them with information that is timely and responsive, and also providing them with the encouragement and the reinforcement that we will be there for you. It just may not be in the same way as you remembered, but we're going to be there in all of our, with all of our mandate, our values, our commitment to helping communities work through this pandemic. Let's look at the next slide now. So as social marketers, we did want to include at the top a bonus, a prize inside the cereal box, or a gift with purchase, if you will. So these are two key considerations that we're going to talk about very briefly, but I would recommend that you go for the prize in the toolkit, and there you will find an elaboration of trust and what that practically means for your communications, as well as the sequence or the cascade of getting the right messages out, ensuring that they're proactive rather than reactive, setting a message and a tone that's aligned with your values, and making sure that it goes out to the right audience. Who needs to go first? What can I share now? What can I discuss that's coming up next? Even without having the full picture in place. It is reassuring, it is positive, and it is really valued for members of the community and those inside the organization too, part of the library community, to always have a sense of, here's what I know now, here's what we anticipate, here's as far ahead as I can tell you with any real detail. But the promise of a continuous cascade of information and a continuous reinforcement of the mandate of public libraries, the inclusion, the Center for Human Potential, the ability to, I saw TPL use this in a post last night. I think it wasn't bridge the digital divide, it was smash the digital divide. Really powerful words. So this toolkit is filled with great advice. I'll turn it over to my colleagues now who have some really practical applications of these things.
Hi, sorry, just unmuting, and I'm sharing my screen so you can all see me. Hopefully you can see my video display. I'm Mary Kapusta from Calgary Public Library, and I just want to say it's been really hard, but there is some amazing work. So we're talking about crisis response, and as you can see, you've hopefully seen some version of this before, the phases of a crisis response and how we move through responding through a crisis. So if you're seeing this, there's a little note, we're here, which we're kind of in the middle, and I would just want to congratulate everyone for doing work. This is really hard work. It's really challenging work. And often when we think about crisis response, we're really thinking about that initial public health issues, how we're responding to an emergency, how we're taking care of people. It feels like a lot of no. It feels like we're removing a lot of things. But what is really important is that switch. And for many libraries across Canada, we're just at the start of that switch between crisis and recovery. And what are some signs to know if we're moving into recovery? And how do we reflect that shift? There's lots of great samples in the toolkit. I think Carol's going to be speaking a little bit more about how we move forward. We think about recovery because that is what Daphne was saying. You know, prepare yourself, manage expectations for how things are going to be different. And that's a lot of what our recovery through our return phase is going to look like. Managing the expectations of what a visitor experience is going to be to our locations. So when we're talking about recovery, how do we make that shift? Well, at all phases of a crisis, we have to always remember first, we have to acknowledge the crisis and be empathetic to people. Because even though some of us might be moving forward in our recovery, there might be others who would be having a more severe personal impact of the crisis. There would be ongoing challenges. So when we're talking about moving into recovery, you're going to start seeing language and visuals that are going to show, you know, we think about the Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. So when we think about imagery, we're going to be picking imagery that's going to be showing helpfulness. We're going to be talking about kindness, and we're going to be using positive tone, positive messaging. But we have to make sure, remember that first rule, people are still in crisis and having varying levels of challenges. So we always have to be positive as appropriate. So when we talk about crisis response, there's things that are going to carry us through all phases. And that's going to be the 4 C's. And if my computer responds here, 4 C's. So I know my slides in this are very brief, but if you can remember these things, this is what's going to carry you through ideally all your communications, but they become incredibly important during a crisis response. So we want to make sure all of our communications, messaging, our FAQs for our staff, even our visuals, our signage, everything has to be clear. We also want to be confident, and confident and credible work hand in hand. But confidence is really, and as libraries, we are highly trusted institutions. We're very knowledgeable institutions. And so we're information experts. So we have to be confident in our credibility. But part of that can also be really hard with this last one. Every week it's something different. For instance, working with our government partners, it might seem really hard to be correct because day to day something might change. A direction, the choice to do temperature checks, the choice of a face covering, distancing measures, disinfecting materials or materials quarantine. There's things that it could feel in our environment that we have no control over. So what's really important is to look at how we control our crisis response and focus on the baseline of things that we know to be true. And then also be clear that on everything you're sending out, subject to change. Stay tuned for more updates. Making sure we're letting people know, our staff, where you can find the most important information. We talk about a crisis response plan, and there's some samples in the toolkit as well. But for instance, who are you updating? Where are you updating? And when, for instance, we change a major service or operational update, how are we cascading that information to everyone? When we talk about the public, I think a great solution is creating one-stop shop. So one web page that has our evolving response to COVID. A lot of libraries are doing that. But as we move to reopening, I might suggest creating one that is your response to COVID, because that might have a lot of public health information. You're going to create another one that has preparing for your visit for the library. Once again, clear, confident, credible, and we're going to correct because every day things might change. So an easy way of updating our resources. We're in a reactive environment right now, which is not where marketers want to be. We want to plan, we want to test, we want to report, we want everything to be super organized. But at this time, we have to have the controls we can. If you have a crisis response structure, if you understand your approvals, how things get going, that's what's going to really set you up for success. And we'll talk about some of those right here. So how we communicate during a crisis. Number one, we work with a lot of smart people, but guess what? We gotta use plain language. We gotta focus on our reading levels. I would encourage everyone to think about not only reading levels in plain language, but also how can you visually represent information. That's going to become really important as we start having signage that might have, for instance, physical distancing or cleaning processes in locations. So there's some great samples. I know at our library, we're collecting tons and tons. So maybe do a little Googling, ask another library if they have some solutions. And I know we'll be sharing widely what we decide to do. When possible, group updates together. Nothing hurts your credibility or your confidence like having one information come out on a Tuesday, something slightly different on a Wednesday, and something less additional on a Thursday. What if we had done all those together on a Wednesday? It would have created a bit more of a consistent, more collective response, and that can support specifically for library leadership, credibility and confidence. Version control, version control, version control. As a communicator in your organization, understand that reporting structure, understand where and how things are updated. I like to be that, it might sound kind of crazy and a bottleneck, but I am the final person who reviews those things. So really being clear on when an FAQ is updated, who's making the update, where's the most recent copy, and how are we communicating it to everyone equally. Clear and rapid approval structures. You know, there's lots of meetings right now, lots of Zoom conferences. We have a lot of people on this line. I'm sure we're all having a lot of virtual meetings, but how are we quickly and accurately getting approvals for things so we can respond? And those communication channels, understanding what platforms you're using, what stakeholders are receiving that information on those platforms, and who has the ability to update quickly. You know, I think it was week 3 that I wasn't the person who had the password to update something on our staff intranet, and the person who did wasn't available. And that was an urgent update, and it really highlighted that we needed to have the right people, and we needed to also cross-train people. So to make sure that we could roll out updates as quickly as possible. So with that, I will hand it over to Carol.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about preparing to reopen. So this is the part that is tricky because everybody wants to just get doing. And what we're really encouraging here is a little bit of preparation and taking time to do some planning. So the first thing that we want to do is think about who is your audience. You have a number of different audiences that you're going to be speaking with. That could be your library users, it could be your staff, could also be your stakeholders. Think about local governments, your funders, your donors. So you have a range of different people that you're going to have to communicate differently to about different things. And the first thing that I find is really helpful is understanding what is their mindset. And now Daphne mentioned this at the outset, which is that tension that we have right now, which is between fear for some and eagerness for others. And really it comes down to understanding that you're going to have people all along that continuum, and we need to balance our messaging and understand where they're coming from. As well then, think about what action do you want them to take. Oftentimes we're very keen to be able to communicate things and we want to tell people stuff, but the real crux of it is to say, what do you want somebody to do with the information that you're providing them? Are you encouraging them to use your digital services? Are you actually telling them, hold tight, have patience, we're going to provide you some information? Sometimes just saying we've got more to come and getting people to take a breath is what you want them to do. You might want people to donate and to support you. So this is really important, and Kitty mentioned this right at the beginning, which is every single library is different. You're going to have a range of different audiences who have different perspectives and different actions that you want them to take. So then if you're thinking about what you're wanting to say and to whom, the next thing is to think about what channels. So if you go to the next slide, what we've got here is thinking about the desired action before you choose your channel or develop your messages. In terms of communication channels, some of you have heard this, those of you in the marketing field are very familiar with the terms. You've got paid, earned, owned, all types of different media outlets. I suspect that most of us are in a situation right now where we are not doing paid media. We don't have those kinds of budgets, and the messaging is changing so often. We really need to be nimble. So we're looking at the majority of things going through the channels where you control the message, those that you own. So your own website, your e-newsletters, all of those social media channels that you own. Then there are those that you can influence. So those are ones that we think about as earned media. So traditional or digital media, press coverage. I know there are a lot of questions out there about how do I get attention from the media? How do we get our news release covered and all of that? What I would really encourage you to look at is in section 4 of the toolkit. There is a presentation that I've accessed from the Vancouver Business Improvement Association talking exactly about this, is how do you get media attention in this current time? And the message is very clear. It's a very competitive field. So you need to be very timely, you need to be relevant, you have to have something that's newsworthy. So that's a resource that I would encourage you to have a look at if trying to reach traditional media is something that you're interested in. When you're developing your messages, I think we've all said the same thing across different speakers here, is consistency and clarity across your channels. Develop your key messages and stick to them. What often happens is that we feel like we're repeating ourselves, and we are, and it feels like you're just saying the same thing and you're not saying anything new. And what's really important to remember is that when you say that, you are reinforcing your message, and your leadership is reinforcing your message, and it's okay to stick to those messages. Think about how government officials are communicating during the pandemic. Often they are not saying anything new or different. They're simply reinforcing the key messages. And that's really important, that everyone around the table who influences this has those key messages. Develop your Q&As in the back room. One of the things that I always learned is ask all those 10 hard questions you hope you never get asked, and have answers for them in your back pocket. And that way, if you do get asked them, you've thought about it, and nobody gets caught off guard. How you say it. Your messaging is really important, but it has to be authentic. So what's your voice? What is your library's brand? How do you come across? And what is it that you're trying to communicate? Is it something that's informational, therefore you want to be factual? Or is it something that's more fun and inspirational? And I suspect that we're going to have a mix of those messages as we go forward. It comes back to that balance of the caution and the invitation. Going to the next slide, social media is just one of the biggest things that we're all dealing with in terms of its prevalence, its use, immediacy, and also it is two-way engagement. So I encourage you to think about a content mix. What is the mix of messaging that you want to put out that is about facts and information? How much of it is about promotion? You can see here from left to right, what we have is from Calgary updates. This is very factual, it's clear, it's concise, it tells people, look at this, click here. Moving along, we have promotional things where we're talking about some of our digital programming. And on the far right, what I've shared is something that's a combination that my team pulled together. We do something that's called Book Face Fridays, and it's something a lot of libraries are doing. And it's a fun way to reinforce the messages that we're all trying to communicate. And that mix is really going to be up to each of you to say, how much of it is going to be proactive? How much do you want to have set in a calendar in advance? But you have to find the time and allow for reactive, because social media is real time. It needs attention, it needs monitoring, and it needs dedicated resources. Right now is not the time where we want to give this to the person who just happens to have an interest in it and does it off the side of their desk. It really needs attention, because things can go sideways really quickly. And that's where you need to have your key messages, and everyone who's communicating needs to know what those are and that they don't go off script. Just going to the next slide. As we all start to reopen, and a lot of us are offering takeout or curbside, it's going to move more into a physical space. So signage considerations are really important. I can't reinforce enough. Keep it simple, keep it simple. Develop templates for your team. That way anybody can update, and you don't have to be concerned about them creating a whole new look and feel that is not on brand. Keep the text very limited. Simple graphics, as Mary said. And also think about the use of colors. We all intuitively know when we see green, green means go. If I see red, that means stop. So big bold letters on red is not an invitation. That's an alert. So think about those things. And as Mary said, we want to think about our imagery as well. How many of us have spent so much time getting imagery that shows the library as a dynamic place where people are gathering? I had, it's going to be tricky, and some of us are going to have to just pick up our iPhones and take pictures of physical distancing, choosing images where people are spread apart. So those kinds of things are new to us and are going to just take some time. So keep it really simple. I've got a couple of examples on the next slide here to just close off. And again, this is something on the left, Mary has shared with us what Calgary is doing around contactless pickup. They're doing this in the parking lot. This looks like a traffic sign. It's so clever. People are going to pay attention because it says, drive carefully, read this. It's that yellow caution. On the right is the big red notice. This book drop is closed that we posted at the time when we closed all of our locations. It's very clear and just tells people what they need to know. So I encourage you to keep it simple, fewer, better signs, not a million signs, not a ton of copy, and also reflect your library's personality in your look and feel. So those are some tips that I would encourage, and I just turn it back to Kitty now.
Well, thank you very much, Carol and Mary and Daphne. I think there's a lot of content in what you have been hearing. All of these resources and much more can be found in the CULC Toolkit. It's on pages 36 to 42. If you're flipping through that huge document, you'll see that's a section on communications. Before we go to questions, so if you want to start to think about that, we wanted to just talk to you about communication in a crisis requires calm leadership, confidence, which is I think exactly what we're talking about, and a little bit of humor. So at this point, let's really open up the conversation, the fun part of this hour. And if you want to go to the chat function, and if anybody has questions, we will triage them and see if we can answer some of them for you. So I'm looking for, you have no questions? Oh, Hi, Pierre. So we have something, let's go from Pierre, and then we'll go back to Angela. So Pierre, what about bilingual marketing? And I'm looking at Carol. Do you want to take that first question?
Certainly. I think it really depends on where you're located. For example, here in Vancouver, we don't have a lot of English and French, but what we do have is a lot of Chinese language that's used. And when we're developing signage in particular, we are always doing variety of different languages. And so having someone on staff who can help you translate and ensure that your messages are getting out. Again, it's about who's your audience and what language are they speaking. So multiple languages. We do surveys in multiple languages and certainly signage. And where possible, when you're thinking about staffing your recovery, it's great to have that as well.
Thanks, Carol. Do you want to look at the next question? Mary, do you want to look at the question we have from, I'm just trying to go back, key messages to share? Have you got anything on that list you want to put out there?
Sure. I mean, I think we put some samples in our Google Drive in terms of a previous kind of communications plan around closure. I would just also know, like, it's a lot is going on and there's lots of different ways, but we're all encountering very similar issues. So I know other members of the group and myself, my email, feel free to email me directly if you'd like to ask some questions about crisis response planning. And I'm also almost done our master reopening plan, which has a communications element, and I would be more than happy to share that. Another thing I would add is that I'm working on a welcome back to work staff package, because as we talk a lot about preparing the public for what a changed library experience is, we can't forget to prepare our staff. So lots of more FAQs are being developed in key messages, and happy to share more. Probably next week we'll have some good drafts to share.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. Adam wants to know, are there some specific ways we can market a service like curbside pickup? And I'll be glad to start that conversation because lots of folks are heading down that road right now. I want to bring your attention to, you may have seen in the paper last week that the Toronto Zoo started a new program where it's called a drive-through safari. And the idea was you could sign up and in your car, you got to drive through the zoo and see all the cool animals. To get that off the ground, they invited local media and their kids a couple of days before they actually opened the program to drive through. And they filmed them. And the end result is they got more coverage than they knew what to do with. So the point of that story is that as we talk about curbside, we need to give our customers an experience. So I live in Windsor, Ontario, the automotive capital of Canada. So we know that it's curbside. So we know our library board chair drives a lime green microbus, very photogenic. We also know that our mayor drives a Tesla. And we happen to know that there are a lot of antique car clubs in Windsor. So we will likely have them going through drive-through the days before we actually open it up. I think of places like Guelph, Ontario, which is a huge biking community. So perhaps encouraging the bike riders to come on in and test out the service and get the media coverage that way. Or to communities like Iqaluit, which is a huge kids community. So having a couple of kids going through that pickup service before it actually opens to everybody else. I think those kind of ideas would make curbside really popular. The next one is, we are officially designated an English French, so all marketing has to include both, from Rebecca. So I'm not sure what the question is there. But the next one from Lynn, Daphne, maybe you want to talk a little bit about any tips on getting the media's attention during this time?
Sure, thank you. Mary spoke to this also during the course of the presentation when she or no, I'm sorry, it might have been Carol. I'm corrected. It was Carol when she referenced, I believe, is a Business Improvement Association resource that's included in the toolkit that talks about how do you get media attention during this time of pandemic response and recovery. So I'll give another pitch to that, and then I'll also give a few of my own thoughts around that. When we were talking at the beginning of the presentation about the tension between an eagerness to return and a reticence, a sense of fear of what to expect. There are two approaches that work with the media, and both of them are proactive. So one way to get media attention is to build on your existing strengths. That will be unique in every library system. But for some libraries, they had a pretty well-performing virtual branch or website or e-branch called various things, where people could access collections and some element of service. For those who use the library, this would be well known. But if you look at your numbers and see how many people either don't hold a library card, are not active users, or value the library but are not a library user, there are plenty of opportunities to explain what already exists that will be new to others. So tying it in to you don't have to build an airplane in the air to try to pitch something that would be greatly valued to a whole new audience. The fact that it exists doesn't mean that they know that. So that's a great angle to take, building on highly relevant aspects of your collection. So there are lots of folks within the library system that you as a communicator should be consulting with. Those that are selecting, planning collections, planning services, those who have partnerships with the community, and finding out what would be of need and value to those community partners or individuals. Then focus on those that you have as something that you can offer and speak to right now. The other piece is it's probably more difficult. It's a more complex conversation, but boy, is it ever worthwhile. And that speaks to the evolving nature of public libraries and the fact that the foundational values, the mandate, our role in communities, our ability to lift entire communities up in terms of creating safe, accessible, welcoming places and spaces and services and all of those things before the pandemic and after. Those remain a constant. We are on a very solid foundation on solid ground. But this is where the public education part comes in, having a dialogue and having it often so that people's expectations of what they will see when they return to a library that is in the process of reopening, it is not a great shock. They are not returning to the library as they left it, as a user of the library, as they left it in February. They're going to experience something very different. And the sooner that those conversations and expectations and clarification of the role, and we're still here for you, we still hold all those values, they will infuse everything that we do. But what you see is going to be a little bit different. That shouldn't be a surprise when people ultimately arrive. And it should go deeper than the service point looks different, but how libraries will come out of this pandemic will also be very different.
Thank you, Daphne. A great point, especially that last one. So this question, I think we weren't expecting at all. So I'll look for volunteers from the team to answer this one. Can you share some thoughts on whether or not libraries should release statements condemning the increase in xenophobia, racism, and aggression during COVID-19? I noticed that the toolkit didn't address any of this in any section.
I'm I'm happy to kind of say what, because we're tracking this and this is a rapidly changing, so it's a really important point. I would say, you know, we talked about releasing statements on behalf of the library. I think when we start moving into advocacy, that's something we always kind of walk that line, not to say that condemning racism is advocacy. For us, we're taking a more programmatic approach. We have done some interviews about it. So I think key messaging and prepping your CEO is important. I think remembering libraries as democratic institutions, of course, and I know there was some comments about bilingual access. Obviously, I can't speak to that as detailed, but I would say for multilingual and also for newcomer groups is probably one of the groups that has been, for us, we're noticing has been most impacted by the lack of public services. So working with, seeing what agencies are within your community, hopefully some community partners, and seeing what they need, how you could support them. That's been our approach right now. I'd also say providing resources and templates that those partners can use has also been good, but we haven't made a decision to do an official statement, but I think programming would be a big part. But once again, as we open locations and in-person service, if it became an issue, I think there's some conversation about it right now. I know at leadership, we've been talking about it as recently as yesterday. So who knows, but if anyone has any other experience, please let me know.
Carol or Daphne, do you want to jump in on that one?
No, I would just echo what Mary has already said. I think it's really important that you walk that fine line, and that if it becomes an issue that's relevant to the library, then there's a reason for you to weigh in. If it's simply something that's happening in the community, we would probably not recommend weighing in.
Gotcha. So Jay asked the question, how do you reach new audiences? Daphne, do you want to start us off on answering that one?
Sure. Reaching new audiences, I guess I'll build on what we were discussing a little bit earlier, that many of the things that we have in place that we may be able to offer now virtually or remotely are things that existed before. And as anyone who has ever been through a community consultation process, if you've been renewing your strategic plan, or you're going out on basically any engagement process to learn more about the community and to understand the needs and the perspectives so that you can work together to find solutions. You'll often find that people are surprised to hear what it is that they could have been accessing. So how to add new audiences. One thing to note is that if you had or now have the ability to have a library card application process online on your website, you have new audiences. Those are individuals that before they had the option to come in or to be using your services virtually. Now they don't have an option in most cases. If you haven't opened any service points, that remains the only one. They are a new audience. So they're coming in, and this is the first door they're entering. And make sure that the experience that they have and what they see is designed to help them not only meet the need they arrived for, but also introduce them to other things that would be of value. You can meet and be connected with other audiences also through all of the great work that library staff have been and are doing in terms of their community partnership building and connections, because those relationships are so strong. It's so valuable to be able to hear directly from individuals in terms of what they need, the support that they're looking for, maybe a gap in what's available in your community, and understanding from those that are working directly with that partner what the library could do to meet that need, or to refer them to a place that could immediately. We don't have to offer everything, but certainly to be able to connect people at the very least is something we can do. Those audiences, while they exist as a partner, they are probably the lowest hanging, I'd hate that analogy. Strike that. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. Cliche, and so forget you heard that. That may be the best place to start, because you have established a relationship there is trust established, and you can often use that as the starting platform to get information out and encourage the sharing and transfer of that information because it's valuable and relevant. It's most difficult in a pandemic if you have not established relationships, have not established a regular media presence, have not been at the table for those community discussions, and then try to catch up for lost time and expect an audience for something. Now I'm ready to share, now I'm ready to communicate. That's something that will be directly, the success now is a direct impact of everything that took place before, all relationship building. But lots of good stuff we have available that's of value.
Thank you, Daphne. Colette asked a question about the best signage strategy to use for a bilingual community, and I know Mary has already given some answers. So do you want to just respond to that one, Mary?
Well, I would just say that I'm not the expert on it and I can even see there's great people, like certainly people in Ottawa are going to have some good insight, and certainly Quebec and some other areas. But I would say, my previous experience, I worked at a national museum, and it so depends on your region and your requirements. So different libraries and different audiences, you would have much different requirements. I would say thinking about the different needs of signage. So directional signage, that's pretty easy to accomplish. And there's going to be lots of great examples. But when we start getting into the subtleties of translation, and when we're providing real clear instructions, I mean, working with a really great translator, if you don't have the capacity, I think that's really, really important, especially understanding the translation for your region. So I think those would be considerations that I would just encourage, but I bet there's people on this call who are already being connected in. Museums are already in some regions opening. So I would think some cultural institutions, national institutions, they might have some options that, if I'm noticing anything through this, it's that people are willing to share, and people are really willing to provide signed files, provide templates, because we're all figuring out together. So that would be my tip as someone who doesn't currently create bilingual signage, but certainly something I did previously that it can be very different depending on your region.
Thank you, Mary. Salt Spring Island. Oh my gosh, so nice to see your question. And it's, when it comes to key messaging and communications for staff, how are you remotely training and preparing them for putting on face masks correctly, with dealing with irate patrons who like the mask or don't like the mask? I'll be glad to at least start that conversation. We have been, with our staff, they are already coming back to work right now. So we have been doing a welcome back package that talks about all kinds of those kind of issues for the staff themselves. The other piece is we are going to do lots of role playing in the next 2 or 3 weeks so that staff get comfortable with some of the language that we're going to need to say to customers when we say, yes, you do have to social distance. So I think it's good communication, it's role playing, it's a little practice. I think that will move the question ahead a little bit. I'm moving down because there's quite a few questions looking at us right now.
Kitty, while you find that next one, I just want to add, we haven't really talked about it, but I know that some of us are already doing this. Video can be a really effective way of preparing staff and the public for a visitor experience. Curbside promotion, but also training for staff that we, for instance, began curbside as a pilot, and we have lots of staff coming in, preparing what you have to do at your shift. And this can be cheap and cheerful. There's some great US libraries they're already a couple weeks ahead of us just naturally. Wichita has been creating some awesome video, and happy to share more links after the call if anyone's curious, but consider video, even cheap and cheerful. It can be a very effective way.
Great comment. Thank you, Mary. Julie wants to ask the question, should we keep our community informed of the overview of all the phases of our opening ahead of time, or should we communicate one phase at a time? Carol, Daphne?
Yeah, I'd like to, it's Carol, I'm happy to speak to that one because it's something we've really had a lot of conversation around. Because the goalposts are changing so constantly, What we're recommending is that we do communicate in a very high level way what your phases are and how that's going to play out without providing the specifics that that one step is going to happen on June 1st or the next one on June 15th, but to give people a sense of what's coming next. And actually, I looked at Las Vegas Public Library's website, and they had a really great one-pager that I shared with my team, and I said, this helps people understand what's coming. It doesn't tell them exactly when, but it helps to manage expectations. So that was something that I came across that was done, I thought, very well in very simple language.
Beautiful. If I could add to that, it's Daphne speaking. When we referenced some of the best practices for crisis communications, it is very reassuring and responsible to share what you can now, as in, this is what we know now. So if you have clarity and you have certainty, by all means, that's definitely something that you should share. But as your plan goes forward and you're looking at a time horizon, I completely concur with what Carol said. And the detail that you share as the time goes forward, as you're projecting, is certainly less. So let me give a concrete example. Let's say you have a service plan that will cover the next 8 weeks. So as you get towards week 7 and 8, you don't have all the information that you will have in 7 weeks. So it would be safe to say the following: we have a plan that will begin on this date, and it will be an 8-week plan concluding at this point in time. The first point of service, or the first priority, will be, and you can describe that at a very high level, let's say curbside service at a particular location. That's giving a detail that you have already confirmed. You wouldn't be announcing something unless you had at least that level of detail. Then you could say that will be a first step in our incremental, gradually reintroducing service plan. As it is safe to do so, always putting in that key message of nothing will be done unless it is safe to do so for everyone involved. Mm-hmm. We've taken care of that, and incrementally we'll be able to share with you more information as additional services come online. We're going to use this first situation as an opportunity to learn. Then when we learn how we can improve that experience, we can replicate it. And we're going to do so within this 8-week time frame. So continue to check back with us. We'll be proactive as well. You can go to that one location that Mary referred to, probably that website, that web page, the pandemic response. That is your go-to destination for the most up-to-date information as this plan proceeds. More and more detail will be released. And we promise that we will give you this information in enough detail so that you can make a decision whether to go to a service point or perhaps you want to wait till the next one. So that's a practical illustration of how rolling out a plan could go, giving enough information to give confidence that a plan is in place, but not too much detail that is subject to change.
Thank you, Daphne. So clock on the wall says we're almost through our hour. It's gone by faster than any of us could imagine. So on behalf of Mary and Chris and Carol and Daphne, we'd like to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. There's lots of information that we've shared with you, but I'm sure we would all agree that we learned a whole bunch more than actually we gave. So we thank everybody who participated. And I hope you're planning to attend the last 3 CULC Toolkit presentations tomorrow. There is still time to register. Programming is at 11:30, collections at 1, and finally the one that I think all of us have been really waiting for, the build environment with Halifax and the mighty Calgary Public Library staff at 2:30. It's going to be great. Thank you again for beaming in and chatting to us. Stay safe, and let's make some lemonade. Thanks.